should be all ready to go.
Perfect. All right, Mr. Chair, if you would like to go ahead.
Just to be clear, am I the chair of this, or is it?
I believe Paul is the chair.
No, I don't think I'm the chair.
Sorry, that's not right. You are the chair.
Got me going there.
It's redevelopment. That's the chair. We have a number of kind of healthcare related things, and it's easy to let one like the other. Okay.
So the chair is?
Yourself.
Myself. Okay.
Sorry, that was my trying to get back.
Who's on first? What's on
It's been
second?
such a long time since we've had this, right? It's been a very long time since we've had a meeting. So
no worries. So I'll call this meeting to order. I apologize, everyone, and good morning and welcome to everyone. We have several delegations today, starting with June Porter.
Okay, so I'm good.
Can you put the slideshow up, please, Tara? And while Tara is doing that, I'll just introduce myself. Yes. I'm chair of the Joint Physician Recruitment Committee, which involves Meaford, Grey Highlands, and Town of Blue Mountains, which are Grey County, but it also includes Collingwood and Clearwood, which are in Simcoe. Just because I have attended meetings in the past as a member of the public, and I just thought I'd like to let you know that I am a registered nurse, master's prepared, and have an MBA. So do understand the financial aspects and some operations, and I'm a retired healthcare executive. So just to establish my credibility to speak on this subject. So basically, the title of the deputation is Creating and Sustaining Access to Primary Care. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Tara, are you able to move down the slides as I ask?
Is everyone seeing the tackling the doctor shortage slide?
I'd like to go through them just.
No, it's not. They're not advancing for us, Tara. It's
no,
still
okay. My apologies. What about there?
Yes.
There you
go. So this, okay, the previous slide was just about the members, which I've told you about. I mean, I really think the headlines say it all. These are fairly recent headlines, and even involves Gary Sims saying a region needs more family doctors. I'll speak to why later. But these are areas across Ontario. It is not new. It has been, I would say, exasperated and brought forward to the forefront during our ongoing pandemic. And including the Ontario Medical Association recently published a survey where basically the top two priorities for Ontarians now is access to healthcare as well as the economic recovery. They're really tied in both places. Next slide, please. So areas of high physician need in Grey County, this is identified by the Ministry of Health. You go through a very rigorous process. I really wanted to highlight that all but one municipality town within Grey County is designated an area of high physician need. So basically 91.8% of the population in Grey County live in an area of high physician need, which means the ministry recognizes that you do not have sufficient physicians. And then, so I think that's quite an outstanding statistic, that really pushing 92% of the residents do not have appropriate access to family physician. Next slide. Areas of high physician need, it's pretty well accepted now. It is the rule not the exception, to live in a community that does not have enough family physicians to care for all its residents. And increasingly, like, communities are acutely aware of the need to have access to primary care locally, and therefore recruit more family physicians and or nurse practitioners to our area. Typically, the ratio of family physicians is 1 to 100,000, and currently Ontario has 14,962 physicians, but areas of high physician need means that they don't actually live or have what is called a roster, which is their number of patients they actively serve. And if you look at the population that just even within Meaford, Grey Highlands, and the town of Blue Mountains is 31,940, they would probably need 32 doctors, and they currently probably only have 10. That's just an example. Next slide, please. The value proposition for Grey County for recruiting and being supportive of funding for family physician is that research shows that they're a strong primary care system centered on continuous doctor-patient relationship leads to the best health outcomes for patients. And actually, healthcare is a very important consideration for the health of a community. It's also a key economic driver. For every new family physician, it will generate close to $1 million in revenue for our community. So the value proposition for people is they're increasingly happy with their healthcare. They get appropriate preventative care. They anticipate or prevent or mitigate future healthcare problems, which would, untreated and unassessed, would result in increased hospitalizations, and our acute systems are already pressed. Timely, accurate diagnosis, appropriate diagnostic tests and prescriptions. Return to work oversight, which is important, especially in an area where we see help wanted signs everywhere. We can't afford to have people off work for medical issues. Particularly, they enhance mental health treatment and also compliance. And this is very important because mental health medications often take upwards of 8 weeks to realize an impact, so people don't consistently take them. Decreased or shorter hospitalization, decreased readmission rates within 30 days, a key Ministry of Health measure, and rural areas are above the benchmark, and decreased emergency department visits, particularly for the lower acuity levels of 4s and 5s. That's what the score is out of 5. The lower ones, because when they're there, it delays treatment time for other people. Next slide, please. There's also a value proposition for our acute care hospitals. Family physicians provide key roles in hospitals. They provide emergency medicine services, surgical assist. Surgeons doing hips and major surgery do not do it alone. They need a surgical assist, which is often a family physician. They provide anesthetics at rural hospitals of Grey Bruce Health Services. They provide ambulatory clinics. They do low-risk OB obstetrical deliveries, and they function in the role of a hospitalist, which is increasingly best practice within acute care settings. Next slide, please. Emergency and walk-in clinics do not provide continuity of care, which results from the ongoing therapeutic relationship between a patient and a primary care provider. They also, emergency and walk-in clinics do not follow up with patients for mammograms, pap tests, colonoscopies. They do not encourage people to have flu shots and know they have had flu shots. Some of the issues associated with some reluctance in vaccines with COVID is because people do not have access to a primary care provider to provide the necessary education and reassurance of any concerns that they may have. And it also, emergency and walk-in clinics do not do follow-up, which is particularly important for people who have mental health and chronic healthcare conditions, such as diabetes, heart disease, Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, and I could go on. Next slide, please. Population growth, this has recently been done by Hempson for Grey County. I just put this slide as reference because it is a growing area. Next slide, please. This actually shows how many family physicians will be required and is well in excess of 20 when you look at the population as it grows out. And family physicians is something that takes time to recruit through their medical learning placements and their 2, sometimes 3-year residency programs. So you see the population increasing. Next slide, please. So asking and creating as well is I'm asking and to create and sustain access to primary care. I know there's been other deputations asking for funding. I'm asking for $250,000 for activities which include dedicated resources to partner with the Rural Ontario Medical Program to assist with providing opportunities for learners and residents, host site visits, tours, special events, including the medical school affiliated discovery weeks for medical students ending their first year. Actually, the town of Blue Mountains was supposed to host their first one, but then the pandemic hit in 2020. In May 2020, it was canceled and didn't happen last year. But I did have the support of EMS, Kevin McNabb, and our firefighter chief in the town of Blue Mountains to participate. They also provide opportunities for medical summer students to work with local family physicians and acute care providers to identify opportunities for the Owen Sound and Georgian Bay family health teams to expand community-based services, i.e. for mental health, elderly carers, especially as wait times for long-term care beds increase. Resources for transitional housing, and the potential for a nurse practitioner pilot to serve Blue Mountains, Grey Highlands, and Meaford. Next slide, please. I just ask if you have any questions. I've tried to keep it to 10 minutes.
Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Warden.
What would a meeting be without a reminder to
Yes.
unmute, right? My apologies. June, thank you very much for that presentation. Right off the bat, there was a slide in which, I forget, near the beginning. Oh, yes, it showed that a number of communities had a high need
Right.
for doctors, and Hanover was no. Where was West Grey in that mix?
West Grey should be, did I fail to include that? I do apologize. It would be an area of high need as well, but Hanover was the only one I found on the website that wasn't.
Very good. Thank you very much.
It actually went through all the committee members and Tim Hendry and everything at the town of Blue Mountains. And if that was an oversight, I sincerely apologize.
That's okay. I was just curious, that's all. Committee members, any questions?
If I may. Thank you, Mr. Warden. June, you've talked a lot about the need for doctors. Can you talk a little bit about what your understanding is as the key success factors for retaining those doctors, for attracting them and retaining them? Like once you have somebody interested in practicing here, what are the things that doctor is going to be looking for? And is it different? And this is where I really have my knowledge is thin about a new resident versus someone else who's looking to maybe move in their career to a different place, or does that simply not happen? You only get them when they're first graduating and setting up.
No, it happens in both. Actually, Dr. Hudson moved to Meaford from Mississauga. She worked out of Credit Health team associated with Credit Valley. She did take over Dr. Wong's practice. So someone did come with an existing practice to take over an existing practice towards the latter part, I would say, of her career. There's another physician moving from Stainer that I've had conversations with, Dr. Rakowski. He is going to be taking over, according to himself, he's going to be taking over Dr. Collins' practice, and he's coming from Stainer. I gave him some support in looking at different avenues for someone to take over his practice there. Again, that would be, you could say, a new doctor to Meaford, but not new in the sense of taking on patients. He's taking over the existing roster. So there's two examples.
Okay.
There is other physicians who come newly graduated. Dr. Kingston's coming to Beaufort as well. He's taking over an existing practice. He's coming from Newmarket, and he's taking over an existing practice. So again, patients. I have found, because I've had a number of meetings with potential candidates, and they look for a variety of things, even if they're new or mid-career, is they're looking for financial support. There was an example where I was speaking to a physician, and it was, well, this place in Bruce County was offering them $40,000. Other places offer more. Wasaga Beach offers a financial incentive as well, roughly of the same amount. They offer interest-free loans. They offer reduced rent. So they are looking, because a lot of them come out with lines of credit for their student loans, medical school, upwards of $200,000. The armed forces often write substantive checks to cover that off, so they find that very attractive. They're also looking to work in a team environment, often affiliated with a family health team, such as Owen Sound, or say with Meaford or the town of Blue Mountains. We've had discussions with the Georgian Bay Family Health Team, because they have three. In the sense, they have 4 physicians, but they only have 3 full-time equivalents of physicians in the town of Blue Mountains. So we have, I've been involved in discussions or initiated discussions to try to broaden the basket of offerings for a physician. Oftentimes it is employment for their spouse. Well, a physician chose not to come to the town of Blue Mountains, be a year and a half ago. I did find several employers that were willing to speak with the person regarding, because they worked in information technology. That was very helpful. Others have had partners who are registered nurses, and both chief nursing executives from either Grey Bruce Health Services or Collingwood Marine in general have equally been very supportive. So oftentimes that is very key. I think it's very important, because I didn't make is within the last 10 years, the 3 areas I spoke of in particular, because they belong to the committee I represent today, they have only recruited 1 brand new physician that actually took new patients. And meanwhile, the population is growing, building permits are growing. People want long-term care beds. They also need physician support. Those are very vulnerable patients who need a lot of medical care. And that distracts them from, as it is something they do in addition to their office hours. At the same time, the new graduates or even later career physicians are not wanting what I would say the baby boomers have typically done, which is the 2,000 to 3,000 rosters. They're looking at between Grey Bruce House clinics in Markdale. Their average roster is 680. A lot of them are looking to take no more than 800. So it becomes increasingly important to recruit physicians, because it's not a one-for-one replacement either.
Right.
This is where nurse practitioners can be very helpful, but they're not funded. They're not able to build OHIP, and haven't been for a number of years been funded by the ministry, nor have we heard that there is an appetite currently to do that on a long-term commitment, although we have applied for a pilot.
Other questions? I don't see any hands, but June, sorry, Councillor Clumpus.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning all, and good morning to you, June. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have been sitting on this committee representing the municipality of Meaford, and up until last night, as a matter of fact, our council decided that we will forge ahead with our already established processes in this regard. given the fact that we're very, very fortunate to have Dr. Rakowski coming in to open up his new clinic in our community. And the interesting thing about this is, as June was expanding on what kinds of things are necessary to recruit and retrain physicians, one of the things, a very, very strong factor here is mentorship and proctoring for new physicians coming into the area. And this is going to be an area of expertise that our new physician, Dr. Rakowski, is going to be providing to our area. So it is all coming together, and I'm understanding that there's two more physicians coming in here. This is a wonderful area that we have here. We're very fortunate to live in, and it has always been a curiosity as to why we can't recruit and retrain physicians, because we sure can recruit, or at least have many other folks coming in to live in our area. So there's a lot of work to be done on this, and I believe strongly in the fact that we should also be looking at allied professionals in terms of expanding access to primary health care through nurse practitioner programs, et cetera. And that is certainly a challenge, given that the province does not fund them as fully as perhaps they could and should. And I know that Chair June has done a delegation to the minister at AMO in that regard, and I have done so myself with regard to expanding funding for the nurse practitioner program. So, or at least create a fund for it. Right now, physicians pay for their nurse practitioner help themselves. So it is a huge problem for many of us going forward. What the answer is certainly a challenge, and we look forward to working ahead on this file in many different ways. But one of the things that we're focusing on in our municipality is the amenities that these new physicians would be looking for coming into the area, attainable housing being one, a predominant one, and spousal opportunities, as June has mentioned. Also local amenities. So it from the municipal perspective, I think it's important for us all to realize that we can be doing a whole lot of things with regard to providing services to the general public that are going to be appropriate and relevant to attracting medical practitioners as well. Thank you for your presentation, June.
Kim?
Just a follow-up, if I can, June, with regard to ROMP, the Rural Ontario Medical Program, and their role in facilitating residents' placements, if I'm understanding that correctly. What's the most current, do you have the most current and kind of information from ROMP about the level of interest that they're seeing? Like, are new grads wanting to come into general practice? Are they wanting to come into general practice in rural communities? Or is this maybe there's a larger issue at foot here? That are we trying to attract from an ever diminishing pool of candidates?
Some. I don't have any statistics from them per se. I do know that within this area, we do have a large number of family physicians that do mentorship. Certainly, we have them in the town of Blue Mountains. We have two. Dr. Hudson, who I spoke earlier, is actually the faux lead for learners. So, I mean, Dr. Rakowski obviously will add to the mentorship base that is already exists, and that would be very helpful. So it all depends. Some do rural medicine to tick the box and it's done. Or it may be the only place they can get an opportunity to practice or do their residency, and they will go back. And some do stay. So it really depends. It takes a community to recruit And part of the ask to speak to Mayor Clumpus's point was around transitional housing. Because yes, they do, given what they often come with loans, etc. And it takes some time to, because OHIP always pays 3 months in arrears. As well to get billings and that and establish practice, because they get paid a monthly for the number of people in their roster. But again, they have to build their roster, and a new physician will probably start with a couple of hundred. They don't start off with 8 or 1,000 to begin with. Some support in that way, because I realize, and Mayor Clumpus makes a good point, that affordable housing is coming, but it's certainly not here. If you look around at MLS, you will see it is currently not available. So some support to them. And I think some work can be done in that area. But I think the reason behind my ask is what are we going to do now? Because the county has a problem. It is a growing problem, and it's not going to go away. So while we have some longer term things that we can do, it's really looking at the short to medium term. And particularly because the new graduates finished in June, some of those will have found positions elsewhere for a number of reasons I've highlighted. But it's looking at the ones that either still are undecided, are doing locum positions, or who will graduate in June of next year. So that is the timing of my ask, is for those populations of family physicians that may be available.
Thank you.
So June, your point is well taken, that it takes a community. I sat for, I can't tell you how many years, a number of years, on Hanover's physician recruitment committee. And I can tell you that we have it in Hanover anyways, an absolute champion in a local insurance broker who chairs that body and is absolutely passionate about physician recruitment. But I don't think I'm sharing any secrets. Some of the things you have talked about certainly comes to mind. One is the spouses. And quite often they are professionals, whether it be in the medical field or otherwise, and that's always a big factor. Housing, of course, but interestingly, recreational activities. I have found, and in more than one occasion, it was curling of all things. I don't know what it is, but they were very interested in curling and wanted to meet with the local curling. And so what happens is the committee will quite often have these little subgroups. So we will have a group that might entertain that person for an evening. Maybe it's a dinner, maybe it's meeting up with some local groups, maybe it's theater, community theater sometimes, and interested. More often than not, they're interested in some kind of a work and family or work and play balance. So those activities are hugely important. We always give a tour, and that tour will probably have people that they will meet who we think they'll be interested or have something in common with. And so that's key actually, is who in the community do we think these people might have a shared experience with it, and trying to help them to make those connections. And lastly, it's funny that you talk about transitional housing, because one of the things that Hanover did was purchase a home that we use for transitional housing. So it's interesting that a lot of these, I'm sure that everyone is wrestling with these common challenges. And if we can, share successes, and maybe that's one of the things to do, is just to share successes.
The town of Blue Mountains actually has a very slick process for when we have a physician that expresses interest. I have a list of people. We've had locums come, their partner likes to cycle. I know who to call because, well, I cycle. I'm not the ideal person to go with. So we recognize that is equally, very, very important. And we have other information sheets for the spouse that may relate to children, around schools, etc. So point well taken.
Yeah, and the other thing, the gymnastics club, believe it or not, if they've got kids, they are keenly interested in things like the gymnastics club or skating. Anyways, June, thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
I just have a question. So you raise an interesting point about sharing successes. Would you offer advice on how I can do that beyond the premise of my committee? Because Olive Gray are not members.
Right. So, I mean, is your question, how can we talk to each other? Like, I mean, I would think picking up the phone and.
Yeah, I said, you put forward a solution as opposed to sharing success. And that would be most welcome. I just don't know the avenues to receive those from the areas listed. There are also areas of high designated need except Hanover, which I know you represent, so I can contact yourself. I'd just like to know really what you think of the ask.
Right. And I don't know what to do with the ask. I would turn it over to our CAO, perhaps.
Right. Thanks. And the intent of this committee, I think, as you know, June, because you were at the table at the outset of this, although that does seem like a long time ago now, was that the work of the task force is to develop and recommend some policies back to council with regard to both funding level and funding purpose when it comes to supporting the healthcare sector. So coming out of the various meetings that we've had and the discussion and learning that we've taken together, my intent is to put together a document that summarizes all of this and talks generally about what we've learned, how the pieces fit together, where people have spoken to specific needs and how those needs can be addressed. And then I think we'll come back and look at that with some recommendation about whether or not the current 0.5% is an appropriate annual contribution that the county should be making, or should it be something else? Who should be taking the decision about what's most appropriate in the ways to be spending those funds, et cetera. So I think it's all part of, I think what we're more and more understanding is how interconnected things are. And certainly the recruitment and retention of primary care physicians is very, very important. And I don't think that there's anybody on this committee that would argue with that. The need for new physicians is, I think, well understood and well documented. So how we get there, I think, is where the work of this committee is really going to be. What are the most appropriate actions for the county to be taking to really facilitate the end result that we're all looking for, which was really the point of your presentation.
Oh, yes, I only asked because at the previous meeting we had in September, and I know the presenter that was the ask for the nursing student contribution, that seemed to be well received and be moving to council, the county council. So that's why I was asking.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think the education aspect of that particular ask and the given the situation that Georgians in and the immediacy of their need to move that project forward to everyone's benefit, I think had some weight in really wanting to move forward with that very quickly.
Okay.
I'd like to thank you for the opportunity then today. I would like to say that I am disappointed because equally I see this as a very immediate need for the residents of the county. However, I look forward to you taking the ask and the information I provided into consideration when the report is produced, and we'll be looking forward to reading that with great interest. Thank you.
Thank you, June. All right, we're going to turn to our next delegation. Michael Barrett is here. He's been waiting very patiently. Michael, you're going to be talking to us about the South Bruce Gray Health Center. You have the floor. You're muted though. There you go.
Thanks very much, Mr. Warden, and nice to be here. An interesting conversation. That previous one, I have lots of thoughts I was willing to share, but I thought I'd just keep my mouth shut and let others do the talking there, because it's the issue that's affecting all of us. And probably the bigger issue for healthcare organizations is the shortage of nurses. And as you know, or you may know, our Chesley Emergency Department is actually on reduced hours because we don't have enough nurses to keep it open 24/7. So health human resources is going to be the biggest challenge facing all health organizations across the province these days. So I'm here to talk to you about funding and possible funding requests that could come from South Bruce Gray Health Center at some point in the future. You'll be pleased to know, Mr. Warden, that there's no immediate request today, but I'm teeing things up so we can see where we're investing now and what are some of the possible funding requests that could come in the future. I've pulled together a deck. Tara, do you want me to share my screen or?
Sure, I have it if you would like, but it's up to you. What you'd like to do.
If I can do it, then I can. Sorry, just hang on.
Perfect.
Okay, you can see it?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick here and go through. I'll just give an overview of what our hospital, some of the funding and how it works for capital. I'll talk about the Health Infrastructure Renewal Fund, which, and maybe just before I start, you have heard from Grey Bruce Health Services as well at this committee?
Yes, we have.
Okay. So some of this may be a repeat, but I'll go through it and happy to answer any questions about it. So for those of you that don't know, we're a multi-site hospital corporation. So one corporation, 4 sites, Chesley, Durham, Kincardine, and Walkerton. We've got acute care services at all 4 of our sites, 24/7 emerges at all of our sites, full complement of diagnostic and diagnostic services, and then our family birthing center here in Walkerton. We also have a surgery program that operates out of our Walkerton and Kincardine sites. About 400 staff with our credentialed staff, our physicians and midwives, it's about 560. So you can see the geography there, which all of you would be familiar with. Our 4 sites. There's actually 11 hospital sites across Grey Bruce, 3 corporations. So Grey Bruce Health Services has 6. We have 4 and Hanover has 1. So for a small hospital like us, it's a different funding arrangement that we have with the ministry than what Grey Bruce Health Services would have. Because we're designated as a small hospital, we get funding in a global budget. So it comes in one package, and we need to decide how we distribute that funding across our 4 sites. It's not based on volumes. It's not based on acuity of patients. It's not based on the population we're serving. We get money, and typically the money increases 1 or 2% from the previous year. That's how the small hospitals are funded in the province of Ontario. Funding for equipment and facility upgrades is done through a couple different mechanisms. We have a small amount of funding that we have for capital investments like that, but we rely heavily on our hospital foundations, which I'll speak to, the self-funded piece, the green box there, and the Health Infrastructure Renewal Fund, which I'll speak to. So these are pictures of some of our investments that we've made over the last year. You can see that we've received 1.1 million from our 4 foundations last year. So we have an individual foundation for each of our 4 sites. So there's 1 in Durham, 1 in Chesley, 1 in Walkerton, 1 in Kincardine. They do a great job raising funds for the hospital sites and provided with a significant investment over the last number of years. You can see the breakdown across the 4 sites, across our 4 sites. And I should emphasize that Durham is the one hospital site that's in Grey County. And last year we received $238,000 from them. One of our big capital projects in Durham this year, if you've been by the Durham hospitals, we put on an ambulance entrance addition. On the north side of our building, we had these sliding doors that went to nowhere. So now we've got an opportunity for our EMS partners to back right up, be covered and sheltered from the elements, and can take the patient right into the emergency department without having to go through the main entrance of the hospital, which is good from a privacy and patient care perspective. Some other investments that have been made with foundation funding last year, a blanket warming cabinet, which are always popular, regional packs, pain pump. Regional packs is we are now part of the regional system, so we can share images from here all the way south to all the hospitals southwest to into Kitchener-Waterloo, Hamilton. So if your CT image needs to be looked at by a physician or a specialist elsewhere, it can be seen. So we're really pleased with that investment, and all 4 foundations supported that. The Health Infrastructure Renewal Fund, I'll call it HIRF from this point on, is a fund that comes out every single year for hospitals. It's available to 154 hospitals. You would have seen some recent announcements from the local MPPs. And this is for, the simple way to describe it is the non-sexy stuff. This is HVAC, sprinklers, things that are typically not easy to fundraise for in a community from the foundation. So we've done a lot of work, which I'll show you. So over the last 6 years here, you can see the amount of money we've received. And we we do distribute this across our 4 sites and invest heavily in one site on one year. And if we do that, then the next year that site may not see as much. But again, it's air handling equipment, sprinkler systems, generator replacements, asbestos abatement, which is a big issue in older buildings, trying to make sure we can abate that asbestos. Inside our hospital, excuse me, there's a process we go through every single year. We start with asking physicians, staff, managers, are there capital needs that you need within your department or within your site? We compile that list, then we prioritize it, apply that against the amount of money that we have available. And then in January, February, we finalize that list to either say we're going to fund it ourselves from the hospital, we're going to look to the foundation to get funding, we're going to look for another external source, which could be HIRF, to try and put all these capital projects, move them forward. As you can imagine, with 4 aging sites, there's lots of capital requirements, and it can become quite expensive to be able to do that. Here's a list, and it may be hard to see on the screen, but it's the list of capital projects for this current year that we're in, 21-22. And you can see across the 4 sites where the major investments are being made. Can't see, I'm locked out here. This most significant investment in across our 4 sites is in Kincardine this year, because we're putting in a CT scanner. So the CT scanner, which is shown here, we're putting an addition on to house the CT scanner. So there's a significant investment that we're looking for from the foundation there. And the foundation card has been fantastic. On the left-hand side of the screen is a CT project. So that's the $4 million. On the right side, we're also redeveloping the Kincardine Hospital. It has not had work for many, many years, but you can see the price tag. Phase 1 is we're doing the Emerge diagnostic imaging and lab. So it's about $65 million. And then to renovate the rest of the hospital, the inpatient unit and OR operating room is $113 million. So it's not for the faint of heart, for sure. It takes a lot of money, both from the government side and from the local community. This is the process that we have to go through for a major capital project with the government. Major capital projects is where the government does provide funding. So in the CT example, we're getting $1.4 million for the addition in Kincardine. But if we were to do other projects that were above that $100,000, up to $10 million is a small capital project, doesn't seem small, and then larger than $10 million is a larger capital project. All those, you're eligible for government capital funding as well, and this is the process you go through to do that. For those major capital projects, the Ministry of Health does provide funding to cover 90% of the construction costs. So if we were to renovate, and you'll see one of our projects for Durham is renovating the emergency department. So it'll be about a $5 million project. The Ministry of Health, if this was to be approved, would cover 90% of that. And then we'd be looking to the local community for the 10%. And that's where you're going to see requests coming from the hospital to the community, to the foundation, and then the foundation will work with the community and come to local municipalities looking for contributions to help fund that. As I said, that remaining 10% is to be fundraised locally. It covers the 10% share, but you also have to pay for IT software, medical equipment, supplies, site works like parking. All those things have to be funded by the local community. Future capital projects for Durham. So this is these are projects that are not yet. We're just starting to talk about this, so I don't want you to think that they're we've made great progress. So the first one is getting the emergency department entrance fixed up. If you've been to Durham lately, the front entrance to the emergency department is not the nicest, and certainly could be improved in terms of not only appearance, but patient flow and privacy and all of those things. The biggest piece for Durham project that's we're starting to talk about now is to renovate the emergency department. The emergency department in Durham is very, very old, needs to be renovated, does not have good flow for patients, for our staff, privacy, all of those things. So you can see the project that's coming up there. X-ray suite renovation is another project that we're starting to talk about. In parking gate replacement, which seems small, but parking gates are, for some reason, very expensive to replace. So this is what I said at the start, is that I've given you an overview of what the projects are that are in play right now, or could be starting in the near future. This is to give this committee and Grey County Council an update on where things stand, and that we may be coming to you in partnership with the foundation for a request in the future. There's no request today, but these requests certainly could come in the future. And as I said, the big one that's just starting is to look at renovating the emergency department. So I'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Michael. Committee members, do you have questions? Councilor Milne?
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thank you, Mr. Barrett, for the presentation. And I guess my question is maybe it's a little too specific, but I'll ask it anyway. In regards to your Durham project, you spoke about the parking gate, and I'm familiar with the Durham property. And why don't you just get rid of the parking gate? I've always found it rather ludicrous that if I'm coming to the hospital in an emergency situation, I got to stop at the gate, push the button, get my ticket, go through, and then go to the emergency. Why this process of going through the gate? Why not get rid of it altogether?
Mr. Warren, through to Councillor Milne, you're not the first person to ask me this question.
I hope not.
And I'll answer it, and then I'll tell you a story that kind of emphasizes your point here. For hospitals, we do not have many mechanisms to raise revenue. So larger hospitals can rent out space to vendors coming in like Tim Hortons or cafeterias, things like that. For small hospitals, we have very little option. So that provides us with additional funding that we can use to reinvest back into the hospital. So that's why we do it. And if we were to go to the Ministry of Health and say, we want more money for whatever, these are the questions they're going to ask us. They're going to say, well, where else are you getting revenue from? So we're asked to do it. I know it's not popular, but the message that I give is that it's to reinvest back into the hospital.
And the story?
And my little, yeah, I shouldn't have opened this up, but so when I was in my old job with the Lynn, the funder, you're having these conversations, and at the time, the CFO from the Listowel Hospital says, we were saying, well, have you looked at all your revenue sources? And he says, yeah, we've put the parking in, but it's costing us more than what it actually generates because everybody keeps breaking the parking gate handle, so, or the arm that comes down. But that was many years ago, but it still sticks with me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Kim?
Mike, maybe you could speak to what you're seeing as far as, is the right word utilization, traffic, patients, patient numbers? As we see, as our growth study indicates, we're seeing some unprecedented growth in our communities. Is there a spillover effect to your operations?
Yeah, it's a bit distorted because of COVID. So during COVID, we canceled surgeries. We're, discouraging people to come to the hospital unless it's necessary at the very start, which quickly stopped. But there was a big dip in emergency department visits, a big dip in inpatient care. But now that we're back, we're seeing an increase again in emergency department visits. So they're getting back to those normal levels. One of our biggest challenges is that we're seeing our patients and they're staying with us longer because of they become alternate level of care. So they come to hospital, they need to leave the hospital to go to long-term care or to supportive housing or behavioral support unit. And the number of spaces there have dropped considerably. So patients are staying with us longer, and typically, a third of our patient beds are filled with patients that no longer require hospital care.
Right.
So simple answer, emergency department visits are getting back to what they were before, and we have our occupancy is much higher, our capacity is much higher. We're typically operating at 100% across all 4 of our sites.
Okay.
So Michael, if I might, I'm looking at slides 12 and then slide 16. And I think I have the answer, but I see some projects on slide 12, I see some capital projects for Durham in the middle. That's 16.
Okay.
Okay, so we can start with 16, that's fine. I'm gathering that 16 talks about things that you're planning to do sort of in the future, because it says future capital projects, correct?
That's correct.
So they're not on the near radar, but they are sort of anticipated in the future.
Correct.
That would say, if I go to slide 12, those 3 projects are the ones that are near, correct?
Correct.
And in another slide, I saw a mention of a generator replacement. Is that not considered a capital project?
Yeah, so the generator replacement will be funded through HERF. So it's that money that comes from the government for infrastructure, and we're going to be doing that this year. So it should be in that 21-22 list to show that it's an investment.
Okay. And while there is no specific ask today, if we were sort of looking out a little bit, where might we expect the ask to come when it does come?
The ask is most likely, so the emergency department renovation is early days. So I put it on there in the presentation today just to make sure that you're aware that it's coming. So most likely the request to county council is going to come through for that emergency department renovation investment, because that's with a $5 million project. If it's approved by the government, we get 90% from the government and need 10% from the local community. So that's about $500,000 that we'd have to raise locally to fund it.
Thank you. Okay, other questions? We are back on time. So with that said, thank you for this presentation. I know you're going to be sticking around because next we're going to be talking about the Grey Bruce Ontario Health Team, which is you, Michael, and Alex.
I think we told Alex 10:30. Is that
10:30?
correct?
Okay.
10:25, I think is what I told him.
Yeah.
No worries. What we could do is take a short break, maybe stretch our legs and grab a coffee, refresh our coffee or something like that, and come back at 10:30-ish.
And you see Alex is here, so we'll be ready to go when you come back from break.
Okay, let's just stretch our legs and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Mike, they leave the live stream going through the break time. So if you want to just kill your video.
Thanks, Kim.
Hi, Alex, are you able to hear me?
Like most of us are back.
Okay, we're just going to bring Alex into the meeting.
Okay. Yes. Looks like he's got sound but no video.
Okay.
There you are. Hi, Alex.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, Olivia, I think we have quorum, Tara. Olivia, you let me know when we're good to go.
You're good to go.
Thank you very much. So we are back and we now have Michael Barrett again and Alex Hector. We're going to be talking about the Grey Bruce Ontario Health Team. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
Great, thanks, Warden Hicks, and the committee's had an opportunity to meet me. I'll just let Alex introduce himself, and then we'll get into the presentation.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about OHT. My name is Alex Hector, Executive Director of the Southeast Grey Community Health Center, as well as co-chair, together with Mike Barrett, of the Grey Bruce OHT Planning Committee.
Welcome.
Great, thanks again, Mr. Warden, for inviting us to the committee today. And Alex and I haven't practiced this in terms of who's doing what with this presentation, but we've done a few of these, so we'll ham and egg it to go back and forth. Maybe I'll kick things off, and I'll again share my screen, and then we can get things started.
It's quite all right. If I can't, if I have to take time to figure out that I'm chair, you can figure this out.
Okay. So again, thanks very much for having us here today. And when Kim had invited me to talk about the funding piece, she also said it'd be a good time for the update on the OHT. So that's why we're here, and happy to answer any questions that come from the group. And hopefully all of you have heard about OHTs. It's the new structure that's being introduced across the province of Ontario. You look back, 20 years, it was the Ministry of Health introduced Ministry of Health regional offices. Then, 15 years ago, it was LINs, the local health integration networks, and now they've evolved into being the Ontario health teams. So you can see the definition there that's provided by the Ministry of Health. And really the purpose of the OHT is to ensure that providers are working together in the care of the patient. And you say, well, sure, that's happened before. And it does happen to a very large extent across different areas across the province, or all across the province. But the OHT is intended to bring partners together so that the patient is better connected between the different organizations that they're interacting with in the system. So in this picture on the left, you can see the different providers are all interacting separately with the patient. In the diagram on the right, they're all under that umbrella of being connected. And this is something I say consistently when you survey patients or clients or residents. They all say that their experience, or the large majority say their experience with the individual organization is great. So it's whether with their family physician or with their long-term care home or with the hospital. But where they experience frustrations is during those transition points between those partners. So going between the family physician and the hospital, or going between hospital and long-term care. And that's what the OHT is intended to address. There's a number of legislative components to this, which may be hard to see on this slide, but it's legislation was introduced in 2019, which made a number of amendments, which amongst a number of things, consolidated a number of different previous organizations into Ontario Health, which is a new central agency. So that includes the LINS, Cancer Care Ontario, Trillium Gift of Life. They've all been brought together under the Ontario Health banner. And then under that Ontario Health banner, there's individual Ontario Health teams being created in different geographies. And so we have that opportunity here in Grey Bruce. Here in Perth has one, Oxford has one. You go around the geography and you know where the different OHTs have been created. So on September the 17th, just a little over a month ago, the Deputy Premier Minister of Health announced that the Grey Bruce OHT has been approved. We've been working together, the partners, over the last number of months to get to this point, but we're now approved and can start to make some work. This is a timeline of things we've been doing since the legislation was first introduced in 2019. We had to submit a readiness assessment, then we had to submit a full application, and it's that full application that's got us to the point of being approved here. So maybe I'll just talk about this survey, and then I'll pass it over to Alex to talk about some other components that are going on. So before we submitted our full application, we wanted to speak to partners across people across Grey Bruce to get a feel for what's their, what do they believe the state of healthcare is in Grey Bruce. So we released a survey back in November last year. We received over 1,100 responses in 2 weeks. The responses you can find on the website. So there's a Grey Bruce OHT website, which you can see at the bottom of this slide. And some of the common themes, challenges in accessing primary care. So it relates back to the first presentation the committee heard this morning. And the second one is common theme is challenges navigating the healthcare system. So we've taken that and identified what our projects are going to be for moving forward. So maybe with that, I'll pass it over to you, Alex, and continue on.
Great, thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. And if you could be my page turner, appreciate
for
that.
Sure.
All right, thank you. So as you can see from this slide, we're on a journey, and Mike has talked to some of the stakeholder engagement to date. There's been quite a bit. Of course, all the health service provider organizations, as well as the for-profit service provider organizations, have been intensely involved in discussions around how we form our OHT, together with our MPPs, elected officials in the municipalities. We made presentations to various councils last year. We're engaged with physicians, nurse practitioners, Indigenous community, paramedic services, and so on. And so as we evolve our OHT and as we learn, we need to be very inclusive in our approach. And we know for sure that we haven't got it all figured out, and there's lots more to learn. So we need to be very thoughtful and respectful to ensure that we take a very inclusive approach and make sure that we include stakeholders that we have not yet engaged with. And as you can see, there's a number of them identified on the slide here, and more steps down the road to engage with them. Next slide, Mike. Thanks. So we're focused on our first year, and that's basically when we get our OHT from the approval, which was just provided. We get our structure set up and running, and our structure is is proposed to be a formal collaboration between all our individual health service provider organizations, and together we've identified what our focus population is, and we're very confident that we've got the right focus, because based on the survey that Mike had mentioned earlier, you can see the support for that choice of the year one priority population. The idea of a year one focus is to say, okay, so the health system is a big system with lots of moving parts. let's be very thoughtful and considerate of where we're going to implement changes to affect system-wide improvement. And so we're focused on these two segments, basically frail seniors with a focus on transitions in care, and patients and clients living with mental health and addiction issues. And so within those two segments of our population, what projects can we identify to affect improvement across the system? And that's really sort of our year one focus. From that, we will learn how to work together. We will learn things like, do we need to transfer functional responsibilities from one organization to another? There's a whole myriad of things that we're going to learn together. We have to be very, very careful and thoughtful that when we're implementing changes, we don't have unintended consequences where we decrease the level of service that's being provided. The whole intent here from that umbrella is to improve service. And so thoughtful consideration of the changes that we want to put in place so that we don't result in a decline of service. So that's our year one focus. Next slide, thanks. I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, our organizations are working together in a collaborative way. And so we're, in a sense, formalizing our collaboration. And maybe I'll stop for a second. Grey Bruce has been very unique in that we've had for many, many years an integrated health coalition of health service provider organizations across the system that would get together on a regular basis to share ideas, perspectives on healthcare, et cetera. What we're doing with our OHT is enhancing that collaborative type of approach through a decision-making agreement. We're all having a role, a say in how that agreement is being formulated, and then we're going to all be asked to sign on to say, okay, so how do we handle things like when we have a disagreement? How do we handle things like identifying what our project should be? How do we handle an expulsion of member? How do we handle situations where somebody wants to withdraw from a project, that type of thing. So you can see there, it's really all about enabling all of us in a very deliberative way to share goals and accountabilities. Next slide, Mike. So our structure, and I mentioned that a couple of minutes ago, is really the next key step for us, is to get our structure stood up, and so that we can then identify the projects that we need to focus in on. And it's got various components that are either currently in place or are in the process of being developed. So the Community Council, which Mike spoke to a couple of minutes ago, we have a Physician and Nurse Practitioner Council. We have an engagement subcommittee, a collaborative decision-making arrangement subcommittee, and of course the Integrated Health Coalition that I spoke to a moment ago as well. We just had a meeting yesterday with representatives from the board of directors of all the, I couldn't say all, but many of the health service provider organizations across Grey and Bruce. They were all invited, but in these types of things, you don't get 100% participation. And that process is evolving. All of these councils and subcommittees are intended to provide support, advice, guidance to the partnership table. And that partnership table is composed of the executive directors, CEOs, so the executive function of all of the health service provider organizations in Grey and Bruce. And so together, we will identify our year one projects and learn together how to work in a much more formal, collaborative way. Next slide, Mike. So maybe, Mike, do you want to talk to this slide?
Sure. We're almost done here, Mr. Warden. I'll just wrap things up. So Alex spoke about the different councils that are going to be supporting the OHT. The Community Council is really the patient, family, resident group. So we had put a notice out, asked for people, patients, clients, residents, family members, caregivers to put their name forward. We had 200 people express interest, went through an interview process, narrowed that down to 10, and we've now selected 10 patients, clients, residents, family members, caregivers to be part of the 12-member council. The remaining 2 members of that community council, we're going to have 1 representative from each of the First Nations in Grey, Bruce, Nawash, and Saugeen. Physician and Nurse Practitioner Council, It's hard to get physicians engaged sometimes, but I can tell you this, they've been really quite active in the OHT conversation, which is encouraging for Alex and I and the rest of the OHT group. And then the Chair's Counsel, Alex spoke to already. So we've got some good inputs to make sure we're making sound decisions. And finally, just before I wrap up, Mr. Warden, the things we're doing right now. So we have to get it's called a collaborative decision-making arrangement. So this is the agreement that Alex spoke to. We need to get that put into place. We're going to be embarking on a strategic planning and engagement process this fall, where we'll go out to all the providers and talk to them about this arrangement, because we need signatures from everyone to be part of the OHT. The second thing, we've been holding community information series. So we held one in June, we held one in September, another one's coming up in August. And it's not really about the OHT, it's about the health system in Grey Bruce. So the first one was hospitals, long-term care and home care. And the second one is community mental health, community support services and primary care. Next one coming up is going to be some other sectors, but just information about the health system. So it's been very well received by the public. Yep. The last thing is the collaborative quality improvement plan. So if you're in a family health team group or a hospital, you have to prepare a quality improvement plan. It talks about how you're going to improve quality in your organization. With OHTs, they're not only asking for one organization, they're asking it for all the organizations. So how are you going to improve quality across all the providers in Grey Bruce? So this is at the heart of what the OHT should be doing, is improving quality for patients. But it's going to be it's a big job. We've got lots of work to do. And with the recent approval, we now get some money from the government, which is helpful because we've been cobbling together money from each organization to do the work we've been doing. We've only had 2 staff to do all this work, and one of those, our lead person, has just resigned, so we have to recruit a new person. But with a new funding from the government, we'll be able to hire a couple new staff, help with this OHT work, because all of us that are engaged are doing this off the side of our desk. So Alex and I have our regular jobs. And we need that administrative support to make sure we're successful. So that's one of our key, in addition to the strategic planning process, getting that administratively hired. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Alex and Michael, for that presentation. Very interesting. I have questions, but I'll let others go first. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation on the OHT. It's a journey indeed, as you described. And I'm heartened to hear the progress that's been made, certainly on the operational or on the health care side of it, which is good. It's great, in fact. But this question probably isn't new to you, as I think I've asked it before, and I'll come back to it. Is where does the accountability lie for the funding, and how is the funding model going to work, and what's your governance structure going to be? Are you looking at all of the board members that are currently of the various suppliers or of the providers? Are they going to constitute the overall board, or how is that going to work? I'm curious to know.
Mike, do you want me to jump in?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, and thank you for asking that, because it's obviously a very, very important part of it. The Chair's Council that we've formed is the body that's going to help us figure out that governance piece. So these are representatives from basically chairs or designates from the health service provider boards of directors across Grey and Bruce. And so we've had 2 meetings with them. One was sort of really just an introductory orientation session, similar to what we just did here. And then the second one, which we had last night, we started getting into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of it. So it's still early days, and so I can't give you a definitive answer. But what I can tell you is it's clearly in the front of all our minds and actively under development. From the funding perspective, so there is an initial amount of funding that Mike just referred to. What's uncertain is what is the future funding for OHTs going to be? And we don't have answers to those questions yet, nor do we actually have the funding agreement with the ministry in our hands yet. So it's hard for us to kind of talk to that. Suffice it to say that the Ministry of Health sees it as an important initiative. So does the provincial government. There's an election coming up in the spring. I suspect that we'll see sort of status, this is just my own personal perspective, see a bit of a status quo, let these things develop that we're working on, that we're obliged to as part of our formation as a new team. And then we'll probably see more information coming out after the election around sort of sustainment funding and all the requirements associated with that. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Well, I guess there's a lot of unknowns, so I guess that's as good as it's going to get, right?
Sad to say at the moment, yes.
Well, and I appreciate that. I do appreciate that, but you know, it's sort of a foundational thing.
Yeah.
You've got all these groups that have boards and executives and all the rest of it. Are you looking at creating, you know, a new corporation to accept the funding from the ministry, or you know, there are lots of questions, and again, I can appreciate there's a lot of unknowns there, but you know, those are things that, you know, need to be sorted out. I would suggest sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. And the beauty of the approach, although it's been a little bit frustrating to sort of deal with a bit of an ambiguous implementation, the beauty of it is that it's not prescriptive in nature. It is a chance for us in Grey and Bruce, from the grassroots up, to form our own team and determine its structure. The conversations that we've had to date are not suggesting that we form a new healthcare organization and merge our corporations into that new entity. Our approach to date has been, we will formalize a collaborative decision-making approach and retain our individual health service provider organizations and their boards. That's the intent. There is no mandate from the government to say, you know, one way or the other. In large urban centers, we're tending to see those super corporations being formed. In rural environments, tending to see more collaborative, formalized collaborative arrangements being put in place with individual boards being maintained.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Questions from anyone else? Maybe I can ask a question. So this might be taking us back a bit. We had LHINs, now we have Ontario Health Teams. What's the difference? Like, why did we need Ontario Health Teams versus LHINs?
I can give this one a shot, Mr. Warden. So being intimately familiar with LHINs, so you look around the world, governments are always changing the health system structure, what they look like, what they formulate, how they're formulated. Many other provinces across Canada have regional health authorities. Some of those provinces started with, 17 regional health authorities, went down to 4, went down to 1. In Ontario, we started with regional offices with the Ministry of Health and moved to local health integration networks. The OHTs will be doing similar work to what the LHIN would have been doing. But the beauty of the OHT is that it's a much smaller geography, and the people of Grey Bruce can then dictate what goes on within their own respective community. And for me, the big difference is not somebody from London saying what Grey Bruce is going to be doing for the health system here. It's the people of Grey Bruce outlining that. There's challenges with that, because how do you ensure consistency across the province if you've got 80 or so Ontario Health Teams doing separate things? So there has to be some level of consistency between those OHTs, but it really allows the Grey Bruce area to put its mark on the health system as opposed to having someone else do it.
So if I heard you right, then OHTs are like more localized LHINs.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. We don't, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and I think a really important piece to mention here is that we do not have anything close to what the infrastructure of the LHIN had. So with staff and policy people and people to do initiatives on critical care or obstetrics, whatever it is. Right now, the OHT is partners that have been in existence for many, many years, trying to work together as a collaborative. There's no corporation being formed. It's partners trying to work together. And that's why we emphasize the collaborative decision-making arrangement. It's how our existing partners can operate. Boards of directors will still have responsibility for their own organization. And it's how do those partners work together to break down some of these barriers as patients travel through the system.
Right, if I may, well, I guess I'm the chair. Another question is, by the way, slide number 9, where you talked about the 2 priorities and that 90% of people agree with them. I'm in that 90%, by the way. But when talking about frail seniors, Michael, you started off by saying that there's frustration with the transition points. And I saw in one of the earlier slides, there was this Connecting Care Act. I'm not familiar with that act, but is that act intended to be sort of a tool to assist with the frustration around transition points?
Yeah, Mr. Warden, all of the structural changes that happen in the Ontario healthcare system have to be started with legislation. So with LHINs, there was the Local Health System Integration Act. With this is the Connecting Care for Act, Connecting Care for All Act, I think is what it's called. So to make these changes, they have to develop the legislation, and then that legislation is implemented through the creation of Ontario Health and the creation of the Ontario Health teams.
So what is in that act? What does that act allow that didn't exist previous to the creation of the act?
So there's a couple of things at the structural level. There used to be multiple provincial agencies that, a complaint of, I think, of government and the elected officials and probably the public as well, is that these government agencies didn't interact well and they operated in their own silos. So you could have Cancer Care Ontario, the 14 LHINs, Trillium Gift of Life, Health Force Ontario, Health Quality Ontario, all were separate agencies. The Connecting Care for All Act brings them together in Ontario Health. So people have called it the super agency. It's really a central agency where all those functions are now in one location, which I think is good. The LHINs have evolved from, there was 14, there's now 5 subregions of Ontario Health. So those subregions are much larger. But again, a lot of the same functions of planning and accountability with health service providers is still there. But that legislation is some of those changes. And the other big changes allowing the creation of Ontario Health teams, which are the smaller geographies that we're talking about today.
Thank you. My last question, when I look at slide 11 in your chart, I see these various entities feeding into what you call a partnership table. How large will that partnership table be?
Perhaps I can address that one.
Sure.
Thanks, Mike. So the intent at the moment is that all the health service provider organizations will have a seat at that table, and we're expecting it'll be in the range of 30 plus or minus. We've asked Ontario Health to give us a list of all the funded healthcare organizations in Grand Bruce, and we're waiting to see that. And that'll give us confirmation in the numbers, but it will be a fairly large table.
Emma, go ahead.
Thanks. Is the vision still that at some point the Grey Bruce OHT will have some influence on how funds are spent across all of your member organizations?
Yeah, Mr. Warden, I'd be happy to answer that one too. So eventually, as the OHT matures, the intention is Ontario Health, who is the funding agency, will transition from multiple funding envelopes to all the individual organizations to one funding envelope per OHT. And then that gives the OHT the discretion to be able to decide where those funds will be spent. There is a lot of work to do to be able to get into that position. And we envision, or the direction that we've got so far is that this will probably sort of take in the range of about 5 years to get to that single funding envelope.
Okay. I guess my own experience is collaborations can work or not, very much dependent on the people around the table and their commitment to the cause. And the knives come out when you start talking about money. You've got a tremendous breadth of organizations here, and yet they all have an important, part to play for their little segment. Certainly from a municipal perspective, our social services, which won't be part of this table at all, has a pretty fundamental impact on how things work upstream or down from there. Our paramedics, our long-term care. Now I know the paramedics and the long-term care are, Jen and Kevin have both been involved in this, and I appreciate all of the consideration that they've been given throughout this whole process. I wonder though, and we're hearing from some of our municipal colleagues some concern about what the long-term engagement for the municipalities, for the upper tier municipalities in this process, given the amount of money that we're putting into the process, the amount of health human resources that we employ. So I don't know if there have been any discussions or if you have any other considerations.
So I think for Mr. Warden, through to Kim's question, I think there's lots of, Alex and I need to do a better job communicating. This is what it boils down to.
I was not being critical at all. I would just nodded to please don't think that.
No, I'm being just a message to ourselves, which the OHT is so very new. And there's a lot of questions, as good questions from the counselors this morning. How do we engage long-term care? Your director of long-term care, Jen Cornell, has been fabulous. Megan,
yes,
from Bruce County has been great. Kevin from EMS have been great. But everyone's asking, well, how do I fit into this OHT? And it's not completely clear yet. As I keep coming back to, this is partners that worked around the table for 25 years are now being asked to work around the table, continue to work around the table, but with a bit more structure. What the end point is, and your question about whether it'll be one funding stream to Grey Bruce, sure, it may happen, it may not. But right now it's about how do partners work more closely together. So we'll make sure we continue to keep municipalities engaged, both upper tier and lower tier. And if you've got questions or you're hearing something that's not right, then bring us back to a committee meeting. We're happy to address it.
Okay, thanks.
Now, Kim, I'm reminded of that little saying. They say that at a shrinking watering hole, the animals begin to look at each other a little differently. All right. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. It was very informative. Oh, sorry, Councillor Clumpus, I see your hand.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for this very, very interesting presentation. But I agree, it raises far more questions than we've heard today, and this one of mine right now fits into that category, and that is the fact that the geographics of Grey Bruce health team is such that on the borders, there will be patients who will be transferring and using facilities and services in neighboring OHTs. And I'm sure that will be as part of the discussion going forward. But just wondering, is because it is something that is very real and became very obvious with us in terms of vaccinations through the pandemic here, with varying funding models and so on, and having patients accessing clinics and so on. So I guess this is a topic for another day. Would that be safe to say, or do you have a ready answer at this point?
Happy to address that. no ready answer, topic for a future day, and a very real issue on in all those border areas. And I think the whole spirit, though, is to make things better for those who need to access the healthcare system. So more to come on that for sure.
Thank you.
All
Mr.
right.
Warden, if I could
Yes,
Sorry.
please go right ahead, Michael.
I leave with one message is that we need to make sure the focus stays on the people we're serving. This is not about organizations. It's not about the boundary issue will be there all the time, no matter where you draw the line. Issues between organizations will be there all the time. We need to focus on the patients, clients, and residents that we all serve. And we are in this together, whether it's police, municipalities, hospital, long-term care, we're all serving the public. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael and Alex. Very, very interesting. I'm sure that this discussion will continue. I want to thank the two of you. Turning to our agenda, we're on item number 4. Is there any other business? Oh, bye, folks.
Thank you.
We have no other business. Item number 5, our next meeting date is to be determined, which leaves us with adjournment. Can I get a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Milne, seconded by Deputy Warden McQueen. Anyone opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you so much. Good meeting.
Have a good day, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.